The first book ever made in America is connected to the first university in America, and the story behind them is also a perfect lesson on how you can buy a business zero down doing joint venture. It all starts in England in the 1630s. A Puritan named William Prynne wrote a book criticizing the Church of England. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was enough to shake the crown. They arrested him publicly to make an example. But to the government's surprise, the public wasn't scared or intimidated by the arrest, but it was just the opposite. They supported Prynne even more. People saw the arrest for what it was, a punishment for thinking. So the crown escalated. They sliced off Prynne's ears and sentenced him to life in prison. Still, people didn't back down, and public support surged even more. Protests erupted, pamphlets flew, and the crown was even more desperate to crush the momentum. So the government took an even more brutal step. They branded the letters SL into both of Prynne's cheeks. Short, seditious libel, a permanent, humiliating mark and a warning to anyone thinking of stepping out of line. They were sure they'd broken it, but instead, bloodied and disfigured, Prynne stood before a crowd and said the marks stood for stigmata laudis, marks of glory. He mocked his persecutors and turned his scar into a scripture of their own. The effect was electric. The people didn't just support him, they revered him. Pamphlets spread like wildfire, and his name was becoming legend. The British government panicked, and in 1637, King Charles passed a Star Chamber decree requiring all printing to go through royal censors. A last-ditch attempt to silence Prynne. They were going to control every printed word, but it was too late because one man was watching. A fellow Puritan minister, a minister named Jose Glover. He had been preparing to leave for the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and while he was bothered by Prynne's arrest and intimidation, when he saw Prynne's facial branding and the torture and the explicit censorship unfolding, he had seen enough. He realized something that most people miss. Glover saw that this censorship would spread to the new colonies in America if it went unchecked. So the most important thing to bring to the colonies wasn't weapons or gold, it was ideas. Free ideas. So he raised money, bought a printing press, and quietly smuggled it across the Atlantic, not just as cargo, but as a spark for a revolution. This would unleash the colonies and free them from England. Unfortunately, Jose Glover died at sea before he reached shore, but his wife, Elizabeth Glover, carried the torch. She placed the printing press in her home and started printing flyers and pamphlets, totally free from the grip of London censors. Then she started printing sermons and almanacs and even student theses. She had some business, but the press was struggling. Demand was small, money was tight. Then a nearby tiny university, only a few years old at the time and with fewer than 20 students, reached out. Importing books from England was slow, expensive, and censored. They needed her help. So the university partnered with Elizabeth. Her press became their lifeline, printing educational materials right there in the colony, fueling their mission of religious and intellectual freedom. The press transformed the school, and free printing changed everything. They printed the first book ever published in America, the Bay Psalm book, but it didn't stop there. Better literature led to better students, which led to better teachers and professors who created better students, and the cycle repeated itself. Quickly, the school accelerated its success and influence. And with independence, the university taught and learned better, bolder ideas. A culture of literacy took root. The school was becoming a bigger and bigger magnet for the best thinkers, the Azam Meos of the time. Jose's press showed the colonies the power of independent thought. The press started publishing articles and eventually led to the first newspapers, and then the entire media industry was born. England was losing control, and one of the first things they tried to shut down were the American printing presses. But just like with the branding of Prynne's cheek, the backlash made the problem even worse for the royals. One of the core reasons that the American independence movement started, the reason why Americans started to fight for independence, was because of the presses. In establishing American independence, the pen and the press had merit to that of the sword, wrote Ramsay in The History of the American Revolution. In describing his inspiration for writing the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson said that the press should only be limited by the truth and no law, stating, "Printing presses shall be subject to no other restraint than liableness to legal prosecution for false facts printed in public." The Founding Fathers focused on the importance of the freedom of the printing press and how vital it was to America's independence. The press became so important, such a powerful ripple, that it is actually the only industry mentioned by name in the United States Constitution. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press. That's how big of a deal this was. And England really started this path towards American independence the moment they branded SL into the cheeks of a guy making fun of him. That's what we call an asymmetrical, a small hinge that swings a very big door. If this is your first time here, I'm Azam Meo. I help run the Midwest Real Estate Investor Association at BigRia.com, and we are obsessed with studying asymmetricals like this. Specifically, we help people focus on asymmetricals to create a six-figure passive income from buying real estate and small businesses zero down. We have thousands of success stories in over 20 countries, so if you want to copy my free book, How to Buy $1 Million Business That Pays You 6 Figures a Year, all zero down, go to BigRia.com. And it's wild to think about. If you trace your finger back and you see that when Jose saw those letters SL branded on somebody who was being tortured. He was inspired right then and there to secretly export independent press. And even though he passed away, his wife carried on the mission. It was that inspiring. And it was that moment, though, seeing those initials SL being branded on somebody for using free speech. That was an asymmetrical. That ripple led to America's independence. And whatever came of that university, by the way, that small, struggling university that had just started and had less than 20 students was Harvard University. And that printing press today is called the Harvard Press. And actually, Jose Glover's wife, Elizabeth Glover, went on to marry Harvard's first president because it turns out Elizabeth wasn't just printing library books, but she was a library book herself. Everybody got a turn. No judgment. Here's the takeaway lesson from this. A main asymmetrical that we use to build businesses, main asymmetrical that we use to buy businesses like this is joint ventures. We help business owners by introducing them to people, ideas, and resources that will double or more their business overnight by doing joint ventures. These asymmetricals can help you make quantum leaps in your income, lifestyle, and impact overnight. And this is a great example of just how far one JV can take. Harvard's survival and success and the eventual liberation of America came from a single JV. That's how powerful this is. And you're just one relationship away. Harvard partnered with Elizabeth in more ways than one because she's for the streets. Stop. No. I could say, speaking of books, she must be a paperback passed around till her spine cracked. No more. We're ending the video. You guys are so immature. I need to stop that. What's wrong with me? I often think of people like Printing, and going back to the day he was tortured and that moment of defiance that he had. There was no way that he had of knowing the ripple he was causing as he stood there defeated, tortured, and facing life imprisonment, and potentially being tortured or starved to death. He didn't know much about his future, but he took a stand anyway, knowing that it would bring about a much darker fate, but not knowing the revolution he was sparking, one that he would never live to see realized. If you told Prin that his courage after being branded and disfigured would lead to centuries of free speech advancements, Harvard University's academic dominance, and America's independence, it would be difficult for him or any of us to believe it, but that's how history works. You don't always see how far your courage leads. Now, as some of you may know, this channel of ours has had some real problems. We were shadow banned, censored, and nearly deleted and almost shut down because of us telling inconvenient truths and asking obvious questions about the Russia war and the genocide in Palestine and a few other things. YouTube and Google have tried to silence us, as they have many others. That's why it's so important that now, more than ever, we speak up for a free Palestine and not let them control what you think, say, or do. There's no telling how far our acts of defiance, no matter how seemingly small, will inspire, shape, and improve the future. That's exactly why we cannot stop. Prin didn't know his scars would spark a movement. We don't know how far our words, our videos, or our voices may travel, but we do know this. Every act of defiance plants a seed. Every refusal to be silenced lights another torch. And right now, it is crucial to a degree that has never been as crucial that we must speak with clarity and courage. We must demand a free Palestine. We must protect the freedom to think, speak, to act, to question governments, to free people around the world. And yes, free Palestine, which was specifically the phrase they told us not to say. Because history has shown us that it only takes one scar, one voice, one stand to change everything. And by the way, anyway, guys, that's the power of one partnership and why these JVs are so powerful. When you do these for businesses, you can start buying companies around you, starting from zero. If you want to see how you can be a business matchmaker and use JVs to buy businesses zero down, go to bigria.com.